Welcome, everybody. We'll wait till a couple more of you get connected here to our shared conversation of personalized learning. Obviously, I hope everyone's had a great New Year, and hopefully, we're all going to survive this big snowstorm here in the east that they keep saying is going to hit us. But for those of you that don't know me, my name is Jeff Craven. I'm the Executive Director of NAMTC, the National Association of Media Technology Centers. One of the things that we have been focusing on the past year has really been the whole concept of personalized learning and and how that's used. Angela, I think there's a question that came in from Juliana. So Juliana she's probably connected via one of our panelists is connected, I'm sorry, as a participant here. So we'll see if there's a way that Angela can take care of that with her. So anyhow, one of our focuses have been the past couple of years has really been on personalized learning and so forth. And at our annual leadership summit this year, we had the opportunity to hear from several people, and of course one organization, the Learning Accelerator, which I'm very excited about, and a lot of people didn't realize the resources and so forth that are there. So we thought, what a great way to kick off the new year, and we would talk a little bit about personalized learning. And we have with us today, we have Juliana Finnegan from the Learning Accelerator, and we also have Danielle Ellen Connor from E2CCB BOCES. So that's an easy way. And Danielle will talk a little bit about what her districts so forth have been doing, and then we'll roll right into Juliana. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Danielle.
Thanks. Our BOCES has been working towards implementing personalized learning across our organization over the last 3 years. So we have been working with a consultant to help support all of the leaders in our organization. So we have about 300 teachers in our organization and about 900 staff members. So it was quite an undertaking in order to be able to think about all of the instruction and all of the departments in our BOCES. So we have career and technical education, early college, high school, adult education, alternative education, and special education in our own organization, and certainly with students that we serve in all of those different capacities. So when we thought about personalized learning, we really needed to make the decision whether we would start with a pilot group or whether we were going to go full bore. And we really decided that personalized learning is so important, especially because many of our students are considered at risk of not graduating, that this was so important that we were going to make sure that we implemented personalized learning in all departments across all programs. And so we started by bringing in some experts around the implementation of personalized learning. And we did start with a group. So a principal and several of their staff members from each of the major programs that we offer to kind of lead the way. So what worked well, what did we need to modify, what did we need to think about when we thought about alternative education and what their needs were. And we thought about CTE and how did the rollout go in one of our programs, and now it needs to go to all of the other CTE programs. So we did have one group that led us off being about 6 months ahead of everybody else, and then we made adjustments. We looked at feedback and then brought all of the other principals up and program managers up to speed on what we were doing to move that forward. So the model that we've used have core 4 areas to really focus on. Some of that being digital resources and how you can use digital content to provide scalability for our students, targeted instruction so that we know that students need specific information around knowledge and skills, using data to inform decision making, and then student ownership and reflection, because we know that when we set high expectations and we provide students the opportunity to grow and reflect about their own learning, that they're really going to make more progress. So that is the model that we used, and we have been training and providing support and professional development to all of our building level leaders in order to help personalized learning become institutionalized. Then most recently we have started to have PL teams. So that's teams of teachers and administrators doing learning walks, taking a look at the wows, taking a look at the positives that they're seeing in classrooms, and being able to share that out with others as far as good practice. And so we're really trying to build capacity for this work as we go along. So I would think that that's probably a good introduction if Juliana wants to jump in with that piece as far as the work that the Learning Accelerator has been doing.
Sure, I can definitely jump in. I was actually just thinking, as you were saying, how do you share best practices at scale, not only across your school, but across like a district or a state. Would it be helpful for me to just say like who I am and my background?
Certainly, if you wanted to give us a little introduction and
okay. And I apologize. I'm in my house today because I had issues with my office. So welcome. My name is Juliana Finnegan, and I actually live in Seattle. I'm the partner at the Learning Accelerator that leads our human capacity work and really thinking around practitioner learning. So how do we build the capacity of leaders and teachers who are doing this work so that they're not reinventing the wheel? My background before this was I was actually a high school chemistry and 8th grade science teacher for 10 years in Title I schools, and then moved to Relay Graduate School of Education, where I was an adjunct professor, and I also designed online curriculum around blended and personalized learning. So it's really kind of what I'm passionate about and what I do. And then just for a little brief, like what is the Learning Accelerator? We are a philanthropically funded organization where everything we build is free for anyone to use, because truly our mission is to push best practices at scale. And we believe that the only way that can happen is if resources are free and open for everyone to use, because that becomes like the biggest barrier for pushing this work forward. With that in mind, we saw a high need there was a lot of schools doing great work and effective work, but they didn't have the capacity to actually capture and codify those strategies to share not only with their school, but actually the greater ecosystem as a whole. So we went around to 12 different school sites and actually filmed their schools and tried to talk to them about like what's their secret sauce, what's allowing them to be successful within this space. And those strategies many times are like core competencies from like a granularity standpoint. Like how do you have students move within your classroom in order to allow smooth transitions, all the way to how do you do data triangulation and look at ways to look at data from all different pieces and put them together to inform your groups. Is it all right if I share my screen?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, awesome. There we go. I always get nervous when I'm sharing my screen. I'm like, what is going to be? So this is the practices at learningaccelerator.org. What I wanted to kind of go through is multiple ways of searching for what you need within the site. Because I think that that's going to be the access point as far as like not being overwhelmed by the 200 and some strategies, but being able to really find what you need when you need it. One of my favorite ways to search is just putting into the search box right here So many times you're thinking about a goal tracker. So you're like, how do I track my students' goals? So I put in goal tracker, and it gives you different places that have trackers and set. So let's say we're looking through, we'll look at students teacher tracking through track sheets. So this strategy, you can see what school it came from, Lovett Elementary in Chicago. It tells you what's the basic context, and then what does the student do? They set daily learning goals, determine whether they meet their goals. What does the teacher do? And then what does the technology do? So it kind of breaks it up into like who's doing what, when, and how. And then we also think it's really important to have artifacts to show how does this translate to practice. So this is a video to hear from teachers and students what they use the tracker for. And you can also download a PDF of a tracker sheet and an example from Lovett. So this gives you a concrete way to see, okay, so how are people using trackers? Now, I looked at trackers and then it came up with all these options. You can also change it by charter, traditional, private. You can do it by grade, and you can do it by the stage at which you're at. So are you just getting started, you're underway, advanced? Obviously with goal trackers, I taught high school and I use similar goal trackers with my middle school, as do some people with elementary, are obviously changing like the scaffolding by which to use them. But a lot of times that's a great way to start searching. On the site, we also have, we call it the learn section, where you can find out like what is blended learning, why would I make that shift, and then what does it take to implement at scale. And if I go too fast, please slow me down. I'm from Jersey originally, so I like false advertise that I'm from Seattle, that I'd be like chill and slow, but I'm not. And then the C, I think these are really fun when you're thinking about school implementation. So you can say, okay, so I want to see some elementary schools, and you'll actually get to go through their journey. So for instance, Lovett Elementary, since we just talked about one of their strategies, it gives the demographic breakdown of what the school is like. It gives key takeaways. What was their experience? Like, why did they shift? What were their goals when they were shifting? And then what are those key pieces that got them there, broken down by in-person learning, technology, integration, real-time data use. So you can see how do they use real-time data? And these are all the strategies that are actually associated with them. And then what were their conditions for success? Like, what are the things that help them push at scale with the replication and scale ideas? So you can kind of go through their journey and see a little backstory to help you have more informed understanding of some of the strategies and how they apply. Then the do section, which is one of my favorites, is you can go through teaching and learning, which gives all the pieces of what we see as personalized blended learning. So in-person learning and technology, which are integrated together. Then you have that informs your use of real-time data, personalization, and mastery-based progression. So you can actually go by subjects. You're like, how do I personalize? And what I really want to focus on is, let's see, student choice and agency. So what are some ways that people are putting in student choice and agency? And you'll see a ton of different ways that different schools have actually pushed this forward. So graduated student autonomy with high schoolers, to balancing student choice and needs with playlists at a junior high, to elementary genius hour. So you can see a variety of different ways that schools and districts and CMOs are actually going after this. Also within the do section, since I know you talked about practitioner learning as well. So like, how do we actually ensure mastery for educators to actually have not only access, but be able to implement? And so this is the train your people section, which is actually my section. We fully believe that you need to define your competencies, reflect and assess on where your educators are at within those competencies, and then offer personalized supports in order to support each teacher in a personalized fashion as well. So how are we not only personalizing and blending for our students, but doing the same thing for our educators and modeling that best practice so that they're not only experiencing it, but getting excited about pushing that in their classroom because they've figured out like how that feels to be supported on where they have gaps push forward on areas they're excited about, etc. So you can actually look at different, we have different strategy cards on looking at different competencies. How are different areas reflecting, assessing, offer personalized supports, aligning systems. And one that I like to pull up, because I think this probably would resonate with a lot of folks on the call, hopefully, is Dallas ISD. Have you guys seen their PL toolbox? Have you guys talked to them yet? No. So this is one of my favorites. They're very, very thoughtful about their district implementation. So they actually have a free toolbox that's online that anyone can use. Two main things I love about it. One is they broke it up into phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. So with the understanding that not every teacher comes at, phase 3 for, let's say, student autonomy. But at the same time, they may be phase 3 for student autonomy and phase 1 for data. So showing that we're entering at different points. And so they actually build cohorts to support the mastery along the way. And then they also have very informed rubrics to show what does that actually look for in practice? What does that actually look like in practice? So we'll look at data, for instance, data-driven instruction. So since we always talk about data, right? They have phase 1. So this is the rubric for phase 1. What does beginning, developing, practicing, and achieving look like? And then they have look-fors that they give to the teachers that say, so this is what it looks like. And my dog decided she wanted to join. This is what it looks like when you're beginning and developing. And not just a lot of times we look at these rubrics and they just seem so intangible. These are just, on lesson plans, there's no evidence of data to inform instructional decision-making. Boom, that means we're beginning and developing. Whereas practicing and achieving, students have access to individual, formative, and summative assessment data. So that's really helps educators strive for what does this actually look like, when you walk into my classroom? What does it mean to have mastered data-driven instruction? And that they have it at phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, which I think really helps with thinking around milestones. If you're you need to get all the way here by the end of the year, it's super overwhelming. So how do we actually break it down into smaller milestones so that we're having achievable goals and getting there and getting excited about it? And everything on here is open and free, and they have the readiness continuum you can download, and you can download all of the rubrics where it shows phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 for each one of these competencies. So I always love kind of showing that piece. And then the last piece is that I wanted to show you, well, actually 2 pieces, is the problems of practice. So what we found was a lot of times looking at all these strategies individually, the granularity can be overwhelming because they're how do they fit together, right? We don't want anyone copying and pasting into their classroom because every classroom looks different. But what we wanted to build was somewhat of a user guide. So how do you start? So we called them problem of practice. So I started building these 2 years ago, I believe. And so I said, the first thing was how do I set up a station rotation in your classroom? So what I did was I actually looked at the data and I looked at the research. So why are we actually doing this? So key takeaways, and each section has, so what's the problem? We need to set up areas to where students are able to access curriculum content in a way that makes sense for them. And when you're setting up stations, you need to be thinking about 3 main pieces: culture, space, and routines. And a lot of times we think about routines first because we're okay, we're going to set up all of these routines without thinking of what implications do they have on the culture. And then also if you're setting up your space differently, I always use the example, a lot of times people put a little chair in a corner and they're this is our reading nook. Well, for many elementary students, they're that looks like timeout. So how do we make sure that we're really clear with our culture that if you need some time to work by yourself, there's an opportunity to go sit and be quiet and reflect and work by yourself, that you're not in trouble for going into that chair. And so it's so important to connect the space with your routines and with your culture all at one time. And so I broke down why is this important? And there's actually some research readings on why is it important for students to take ownership and choice and autonomy? And then the solutions. And I've actually built out little playlists that apparently aren't coming up right now. There on different strategies around each one. So culture, how can a student take ownership of their own learning space? How is it tied to space? Here are some ways people are doing it. And I even put in like some probing questions when you're looking at these. What are some things you should think about? Or space, what are some spaces that people have put together and how can we think through them in a different way? And routines, and then taking it further. So these are more of a pick up and go and kind of like deep dive into different areas. So we actually have 3 on station rotation. So how do you set it up? How do you deepen differentiation and personalization? And how do you develop student ownership and accountability within those? So it's kind of like, think of it as like level 1, level 2, level 3. And then we also saw that a lot of times when we're building these out in our classrooms, we're forgetting about our diverse learners. And I think I worked with the NCLD on this and said, like, how can we make sure that when we're personalizing and pushing blended and personalized strategies in our classrooms, that we aren't actually building larger gaps for our diverse learners? So we built out one on how do I strategically instruct diverse learners in a personalized learning classroom, really pushing on that UDL strategies and seeing like, how are we making sure that we're giving the same opportunities to all of our students in an equal access mentality. And then how do I ensure rigor and high expectations? I think this one got me thinking the most, because a lot of times we say, how do we make sure we have rigorous content without making sure that diverse learners also have rigor around social and emotional skills? So, you know, okay, they may not feel comfortable. One student may not feel comfortable working in a group. Well, how can we build some supports so that they can start building those talents and skills to work in a group? As opposed to saying, okay, well, I'm going to personalize for you, I'm going to let you work by yourself. But that's not ensuring rigor around both social and emotional skills and the content access. So that kind of goes through there. And then strategic staffing, you know, staffing's always an issue. So how do we think more creatively around strategic staffing to better serve all of our diverse learners? So these are also, you can access them, and they have the same structure around what is the problem, why is it important, and then the solutions as well. Back over, so many tabs now, so many tabs. And then the last piece is the Learning Commons. And the Learning Commons I like to call, and have you guys heard about the Learning Commons as well? No. So the Learning Commons, you can get to it by saying extend and go to Learning Commons. The Learning Commons I like to say is similar to Spotify and Pinterest. So a lot of times you're figuring out all of these routines or strategies that work for you, but how do you actually put them in one place so that you can have a playlist to share with, if you're a coach, you're like, okay, someone's struggling with setting up their space. Here are a bunch of different strategies that you can look through, and you can vet those strategies and say, here's a playlist to check out to start thinking more creatively around your space. So it's totally free. Again, everything is open and free. You can access this site without logging in, but if you want to build your own playlists, you do have to give your email address, but that's it. So no money. And you can actually build, and the way I say it's kind of like Pinterest, is you can build public playlists that anyone can find and share. So you're kind of like sharing the collective intelligence of the group, or you can have private playlists. Like obviously if you're building a playlist for a teacher, you don't want to like, so-and-so teacher is working on blah, 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 and here's their playlist. You may want to share that more internally with just them. So I did a ASU GSV panel, and I built a playlist there, and I shared it with everyone so that they can see the documents that I put together and all of the strategies I put together. So everything on our site is actually on the Learning Commons as well. So you can get it on there and you can share it with people, and you can actually say, I really like this person's playlist. I'm going to copy it and give it a new name and put it into my playlist bucket so that I know how to access it as well. And you can search again for, you know, we'll say grouping. So this gives us, some people have already put playlists together about grouping, reasons, types, and sizes. These are strategies around grouping. So you can actually say, okay, strategies for grouping students. I wonder who made this. Oh, we did. Weird. And you can actually go through and see all of the strategies. Some of them are websites, some of them are documents, and interact with them and share them. You could also build your own network. So if you're in a district and you're like, we're trying to build a bunch of playlists to support our specific needs in our district, you can make a district network share that with all the people in the network, and then all of a sudden it's like a private convening room, a virtual private convening room, where you can start building playlists, sharing them with each other, building off of each other's work. And so it's a really fun way to kind of interact, online with vetted resources. And again, this was kind of spiraling back all the way to the practices. I know when I was a teacher, I just went on Google, like late at night, and was like, I need a lesson plan on blah, blah, blah. And you're searching and you don't know what you're seeing, and you're trying to build your own stuff. And this is a way to actually start sharing a lot of the things that we're doing that are successful. Now, questions. I just gave you guys a fire hose, by the way, so I understand.
So a very easy question is, there was a heart, a check, and an eye on those things. What did that represent?
So let me go back on there. So if someone likes it,
Okay.
they can like it there. If they completed it. So you can actually set up a playlist, like, have you gone through all the resources? It's really like that you've clicked through everything.
Mm-hmm.
And then how many people in your group have actually just like seen it, like gone through it. So it kind of is like a basic way to ensure users are going through it. And then they also can see how many people like a certain, so when you actually pull up the strategy itself, you'll see how many times it's been liked by the network as a whole. So it's a nice way to kind of see like reviews of sorts. Mm-hmm. And then this way is too, if you just want to start it. So you can see it over here. Oops. I think because I have it. Open a new tab. And it will just go right back to the Learning Accelerator page. But it's nice because you can actually build out your own things in one spot. Any other questions?
So in terms of human capacity, how have you been able to support school districts? So what does that look like?
So for a while, we were basically, trying to share things on others' newsletters, or share it with, I've presented at a bunch of conferences. Okay. And then while presenting at South by Southwest, the Kentucky Department of Ed, for example, contacted me and was like, hey, so we saw what you presented. We're trying to push blended personalized learning across our state. Mm-hmm. What can we do together? Right. And so we saw this as a great opportunity to figure out, like, how can we start, building out the resources in a way that districts and states can actually utilize them in like a more formal way. So we actually, Neethi from our team, I just came back from maternity leave last week. So
congratulations.
Thank you. So Neethi from our team actually went out there and did an 8-hour workshop where they went through with all of the districts in Kentucky, sent different representatives to have a workshop on. And we actually built out their resources in a way that answered their needs. So there's like, in Kentucky, there's some states that are actually super blended and personalized. And then there's some districts, some districts that are just starting. So we also needed to really personalize that, that workshop so that everyone was getting access where they needed it, when they needed it. So we went through things of like, what is blended learning? So like, what do you actually define as it? And like, what do you want it to look like in your school? And then building resources. And there's actually a workshop where they were able to build playlists on their own to bring back to their district. So that's one example of just kind of like how we're starting to think differently from how do we get this in leaders' hands? I also run the Innovation Directors Network, which is actually, I'm flying out to Dallas tomorrow. We have 17 different heads of innovation or technology or whatever it's called at the district who come together and help us identify what are the ecosystem needs? Do we already have resources to help support those? Or are there gaps, and how can we assist in building things to fill those gaps. And then they're also able to, they're great dissemination pieces because they're like, oh, okay, I can just use this and bring this back to my district and build off of,
Right.
you know, what's already been done. So we have a few different avenues. So like looking at that more systems level is the Innovation Directors Network. The Kentucky work definitely at a system level, but it also feeds down very quickly to the teacher level, and the same actually probably with the Innovation Directors Networks. They all work with the coaches who work with the schools.
Hey, Juliana, you have a question. How were the 12 school sites that you filmed selected?
Great question. So many different ways. Like, I personally have actually been to about 55 schools across the US who've been identified as blended or personalized. And other folks on our team, Daniel Owens was the one who actually went out and filmed. He's probably been to just as many. And so we asked for recommendations of schools who are doing innovative work. And then we actually visited them, like went and saw them in person. Like, okay, so what do we see? And really picked schools that we thought, one, were doing some great work, two, had some translatable practices that would be helpful to other schools in the ecosystem. And three, we really tried to diversify the schools themselves as well, like making sure we had some CMOs, some CMOs and some districts, also some that are really large, like Chicago Public Schools is huge. And then if you look at Cisco ISD is a very, very small one. So, and also thinking rural, suburban. So really trying to make sure that all teachers were able to see themselves in those schools. So kind of a lot of different pieces. Like we would say, okay, so we're down to these 12. Like, does anyone have any information about any of them? Has anyone seen them differently? You know, it was definitely a collective decision, but we tried to give a variety as well. So like you see Bronx Arena is a high school that does a lot of continuous work for students that actually were in the system. So they're coming back and they're a little older. How are they actually utilizing personalized learning to help support those students to make sure that they graduate? You know, and that's a totally different situation from maybe another school where it's very just like you leave 8th grade and you go right to high school and you keep continuing through the same school system. So really trying to give variety as well. Other questions?
Can you show, you had shown one portion of a rubric that was developed. Where?
The PL toolbox?
Yes.
Yes.
Is it, and then the total rubric?
Yeah, so if you go to the full rubric, you just click on the rubric. Like instead of going down all these, you just click rubric. And then you can see instructional domain. It has all these, and you can actually go through. And there is even a great little video that goes through the parts of the rubric because it's very detailed. So they have like a domain, a rubric strand, and then their alignment and where the proficiency level is for each. So you can actually download each rubric and coaching and development of each rubric. And then you can also go through up here each phase. So for instance, phase 1, what does data-driven instruction look like versus phase 2 versus phase 3.
Thank you.
No problem. You can actually, and I think they all go to, so they each go to a page that will show you the strand and then the look fors within that strand.
That's great. And that was put together at the Learning Accelerator, that rubric?
So this is actually Dallas ISD, their school district, put it together.
Okay.
And so we've worked with them a ton. And we're actually going out there and going to visit some of their schools. We're convening our second Innovation Directors Network at Dallas ISD. So they have just done a ton of thinking, and like we've worked with them as kind of a peer support as far as like when they were building this. And then they actually utilize, they're also on our Learning Commons. So they share out all of their, so if you go in the Learning Commons, let's go back to home. I'm like, of course it's decided that I can't go back. Let me see. course, it's decided to get mad at me right now. I'm just going to go here. So you can actually see all of the groups, the organizations that have, so this is not, so the Learning Commons actually doesn't have just Learning Accelerator. They have all free resources from different organizations willing to share their work on here. So we have 2Revs, Better Lesson, Center for Collaborative Education, Dallas ISD, EdSurge, EdElements, Highlander. So all of these have different pages. So Dallas ISD, for instance, built out a page. And what it was really helpful for them because they've been presenting about all of this because they've been doing such great work. And they're like, every time I have to make a big presentation and put everything together, instead they now have all of their resources on here and are able to share a playlist when presenting. Also, when another district within Texas says, hey, what are you doing around X? They're like, oh, here's a playlist. You can go through it and here's all of our resources. So it really helped them. You can even see when they presented at iNACOL, they have a playlist right there. They have all their content and then any playlists and any networks they have. They have different networks within their organization. So you can actually go through all of their work right here. And same thing with other organizations as well. Like Lindsay Unified uses it in a similar fashion where they have a bunch of their resources and content on here, and it really helps them to scale within their district because they can, you know, instead of it being a Google Doc that you have to write a long email to explain and say, okay, go here and make sure you make a copy of it, don't edit it. You know, you actually have accessible resources at like the drop of a hat.
So I guess I would wonder, how is it that you capture the impact of personalized learning to know that it really supports more positively increased student outcomes?
So, I mean, that's the hard part is because it's kind of new, right? So it's one of those things like you're building the airplane and flying it at the same time. So you're like, I think it works. Let's keep going. But it has been around long enough that we can start doing some real measurement work. And we actually have a full partner on our team whose full focus is measurement. So she's worked with Digital Promise quite a bit. And so you'll actually see on a few of our different strategy cards, we're starting to add measurement icons that show like, has this shown improved outcomes? Why or why not? Or is it tied to learning science? So Digital Promise has done a ton of work on learning science. So if this strategy is like pushing X that, you know, is tied to learning science, which is tied to improved outcomes, then we're able to put that on there to say like, this is going to help improve outcomes based on that piece of research. We're also doing a project right now with Lindsay Unified where they ask that exact question. They're like, we've been doing this for a while now, you know, but how do we measure that what we're doing is actually improving outcomes? Like we see it, right? We see that our students are engaged. We see that our students are improving scores, but like what's the real piece that's pushing that, you know, because there's so many pieces working together. So they actually just got some funding and brought us on. And so Saro from our team is running that as well and actually brought on a data statistician to help with it as well. So they're going through all of Lindsay's practices to see how can we set up ways to measure that these outcomes are improving outcomes for students. And they're looking at it both on the teacher and the student side, because they actually do a lot of work around personalizing professional learning. So they're like, how is that improving our teachers' retention and ability to apply to the classroom? And then also, is the stuff they're applying to the classroom improving the outcomes for the students themselves as far as achievement and mastery of not only content, but social and emotional skills, because they're actually looking at both. Right. So it's something in process, but it's definitely, you know, a big question right now.
Right.
Any other?
So,
these are great questions, by the way. You got me on my toes.
So, you know, we know that when we are looking at new initiatives, right? We have a third that are gung-ho and right in there, a third that are kind of wait and see, and a third that are resistors. So how, because the power of personalized learning is when we're all, right, every teacher is doing it, right? And that's how they are starting to develop their culture around learning in their classroom. So what have been some of the strategies that have helped, you know, look at the middle group that are maybe hanging back a little bit, and then certainly the resistors to move an entire organization forward?
So I think like two big things. So one, so I've worked with schools before with my relay work, and I always said, you know, you can't come in and say we're changing everything. So, I mean, that's number one. But ensuring that what you're doing is directly attached to an instructional challenge, I've seen is where you get the most buy-in. Because when you say, okay, so this is something we're struggling on. You know, we have a lot of students who are far below basic in math. Or one school actually said, you know, they're actually doing pretty good, but they're very compliant. They're not engaged. You know, they're not loving learning. So really identifying the why,
Okay.
and then the how being the personalized blended learning, but not even, you don't even need to name it as that. Like, so how are you leveraging technology to address that instructional challenge and teach students better? So as long as you're like, this is how we're going to teach our students better, I've seen buy-in across the board, you know, those percentages shift, because no teacher is going to say, well, I don't want to teach my students better. Right? Like, or if they understand, like, that's the problem across the board. I think another thing is, especially at a school that's like brand new, you want to kind of build a pilot cohort of sorts, where, and in that cohort, a lot of times people jump to the people who want to do it, right? You're like, okay, I mean, I was one of them way back when, like the 22-year-old who has all the time in the world and is like, I'll do anything. Like, I don't have anything else going on. You can't just pick that person. Like, you need to really make sure it's a heterogeneous group that includes maybe the energetic one, but also someone who is social capital. I think that's the number one thing. And a lot of times that person is sometimes in the naysayers of like, I don't want to do this. But getting someone who is a really strong educator, who's probably doing a lot of these things already and highlighting that they're doing a lot of these things already, and then bringing them into the fold to be a part of that like leadership thinking cohort of like, how do we do this across the school? Because if you get that person bought in, I mean, the sky's the limit. So I always say, like, you know, really make sure that if you're doing a pilot group or you're using, because I always say, you know, I told one school, I was like, do not hand out devices until January. And they were like, what? And they're like, we have them. Like, why wouldn't we give them to people? I was like, because unless the teachers, the students in the community understand why you're using devices, it's not going to shift practice. It's just going to be a really cool typewriter. And you don't want it to be that. You want it to be like, so why are we using this? So that I can learn in different ways, so that it pushes me to, you know, if I don't understand something, I can find different ways to do it. Or, you know, really understanding on all, like, there's readiness on all levels. And so that's why I say, like, build a small group that like kind of goes through, what is it going to look like at our school? What are going to be some of the challenges? How are we going to roll this out? Who's going to do it first? So doing all of those questions and setup with a small group that will stress test it. Like, you don't want everyone to be like yes people in that group, because then it's just going to come out and everyone's be like, well, of course they're in. Like, hello.
Right. They're in on all initiatives, right?
Right. And so you really need to have that, like, I always have like a few people in my head from my past school, like, have the social capital. And I led the technology committee when it was like, didn't exist, you know. And they were like, what are you doing? I don't even log into my email. If you want me to know something, just tell me. I was like, okay, let's first work on email.
Right.
But it's amazing, because I would say those teachers, those really strong instructors, are going to actually just leapfrog everyone else, because they already have those strong cultures in their classroom, and they're doing a lot of that differentiation without a scalable way to do it. So like they're putting in that time. So giving them to technology and saying like, this can actually help you do what you're doing better.
Right.
So I think hopefully that answered it.
Yep, absolutely. How about as school leaders, the types of structures or support and professional development that is needed to help move your school forward?
So we actually, when I first joined the Learning Accelerator, I did what's called think tanks. So we went to like 8 different cities across the US and brought together 15 different leaders to ask that question, you know, like what are the things that need to be there to help you move forward? And we thought through 4 different, I called them toggles. I was like, if you have it, it's like gas in the tank. And if you don't have it, it's like driving with the brakes on, because it just doesn't work.
Right.
So one of them was leadership, like professional learning, like leadership support, like who's actually helping the leader. The second one was school capacity. You know, so who's at the school, both the infrastructure and the people who can help actually be partners with the leaders when pushing implementation. Because it can't be a leader just doing it by themselves. Like who do they have that's building their capacity at the school to like push it as like a unified front?
Okay.
The third one was, why am I blanking? It's called basically, I'm like forgetting the actual, because we named it 10 different times. It's basically like finances and that it's the district level. So it's like, is the district behind it both fiscally and also theory wise? So, you know, like if they're trying to do it at school level and the district still has old ways of evaluating teachers. So it's like this school is like, we're doing all of these new things and they're still getting evaluated if the kids sit and are quiet. Like there's a mismatch. So making sure that, and then also if they're giving them funding, they're saying, oh, we're giving you funding for this, but you can only use it for the devices. So like, how do we have like nimbleness around, okay, actually we need, you know, some devices, but we also need more professional learning. We need to have some new like furniture to like move around the spaces. So that's the section. And then the last one was external supports. So what kind of external supports do you have within your region? And that's huge gas in the tank too. So those external supports could be honestly like going on the practices site and having like that external support so that they're not trying to reinvent all the strategies, all the way to maybe they're bringing in some external consultants to help with like looking at their schedule. So we found out, you know, these were the 4 things, like school capacity, that the leaders actually had support themselves, there was external supports, and that the district was behind them. You know, and that district also includes, you know, the community, right? So that there was support from that level so that they weren't, we've seen a lot of schools do really awesome work and then just stop because they got funding at the beginning to start it.
Right.
But then they started being successful and they're like, oh, so you're good. Well, it's like, it needs to happen, you know, across the board. Like one school said, they were like, if we could just get like, and all these grants are usually like really big grants, right? So they're like trying to get $1 million. So like, would I love $1 million? I'd love $1 million, but I just need $10,000 for release days for my teachers to get trained.
Right.
Like, I just need a tiny, like, you know, little bit so that I can actually put my money where my mouth is and say like, I'm not just keeping you after, but we're actually giving you stipends because we do think this is so important to really learn how to do. And so those were kind of like those toggles. And it was really interesting. We did it by, and I can share it sometime as well, but we did it by region. So like Chicago, like where are the toggles? We did San Diego, we did DC. And I mean, this is obviously based on these leaders, but it was interesting to see, you know, kind of like where were you seeing work continuously pushing forward and where were you seeing some like breaks And why was that? Like, what toggle was kind of like out of place?
Right.
And a lot of times a leader will be like, I want to do this, and their school's not behind them. So it's like driving on the brakes completely. So.
Absolutely.
Anything else?
No, that's all the questions that I had. So I wonder if any of our participants have questions. I'm not seeing any.
No.
All right.
Well, thank you guys so much for having me.
Oh, it was wonderful meeting you, Juliana. I would love to meet you in person.
I know, me too.
Hopefully our paths will cross at a conference one of these days.
Where are you located?
I'm at Erie 2 BOCES, which is outside of Buffalo, New York.
Nice.
Yeah. So that's why we were talking about the weather, since
a little colder there than here.
Yeah, a little bit colder, and we're supposed to get snow this weekend. So hopefully not too much.
We haven't gotten any snow. We usually get like once a year in Seattle, but we usually get snow in the mountains, and we haven't been getting any snow in the mountains. It's kind of crazy.
Wow. Yeah. So, well, that's good though, right? Make it an easy winter.
Yes, but no skiing.
Right. That's a downside.
But thank you so much, and let's definitely try to connect in person if we're ever at a conference together.
Absolutely. It was so nice meeting you, Juliana.
You as well, and have a wonderful day. And a good week.
You too.
Thanks.
All right. Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Juliana, thanks. Danielle, thank you for serving as a panelist for today's session. It was very interesting, informative. I mean, engaging. I love the questions because they're very practical questions and so forth. That the things that the comment I love the best is you're always going to have those that are going to jump in and do everything.
Yep.
And it's like how do you motivate those other ones? So I thought that was absolutely great, and I'm really excited with the kind of work that the Learning Accelerator has been doing.
I have to say, I am so impressed with their resources. I had rolled them out to our staff development team, but I definitely have it for one of our leadership team meetings to really go through it more deeply as we are implementing personalized learning, to look at the resources and the rubric, as well as the suggestions about problems of practice. I just thought that their work around that is amazing.
I agree. Just for those that are still on the on our share conversation, just a couple quick reminders, some upcoming dates to note. Our next share conversation will actually be on blended and online learning, March 12th at 3 p.m. Eastern. That will be with Evan Abbey. We'll be hosting that from Iowa. And then on May 14th, the Instructional Technologies OER will have a shared conversation as well then. And also some in-person events that you may be interested. We'll be hosting our first ever Northeast Leadership Summit at Syracuse in Doreen Bergman's BOCES, and I can't remember what it's called. I think it's at OCM. Is that what they call that? Okay. Mm-hmm. So the OCM BOCES will actually be hosting our first Northeast Regional Leadership Summit. That'll be May 9th and 10th. And then, of course, on December 4th, we'll have our National Leadership Summit in Phoenix, Arizona. So hopefully, if we'll see you at a future shared conversation or at one of our national events. And with that, I don't have anything else to add. Do you have anything else to add, Danielle?
No, I really enjoyed meeting Juliana. I hope I have the opportunity to meet her in person sometime.
Yeah, and if all goes well, we're hoping to have someone there, maybe even Juliana will be there at the Leadership Summit in May. So
that's great.
Details there. So okay, well, thank you, everyone. I hope everyone has a great day, and hopefully think spring, unless you like snow. But all right,
absolutely.
All right.
Take care.
Well, bye-bye.
All right, bye-bye.